Welcome to the Paramedic AF Show with your hosts, Dan and Michelle. We hope you've come prepared to be challenged, offended, and encouraged. We are here to create a better future for the entire EMS industry. We have changed or omitted names of individuals in order to protect the innocent, the guilty, and the incompetent. We believe that knowledge fuels power, ignorance is not bliss, and nothing will change until we abandon the status quo. This is our design. Welcome to the show. And welcome to the first full episode of the Paramedic AF podcast. If you listened to the first one, you kind of got a little bit of a summary of what we're doing. So today we're just going to jump straight into our content. This month we're going to be covering our 4 core values of EMS. Today is specifically going to be diving into the topic of authentic leadership. It's kind of a buzzword in the business and self-improvement community today, but we really wanted to bring it together and show how this is relevant to EMS specifically and what EMS really needs. Public service as a whole, not just EMS, but we're focusing on EMS because we're paramedics. Without further ado, Michelle, you want to intro this topic for us?
Of course. I would like to note that we are talking about our core value, authentic leadership today, but to build onto leadership, again, we will be reviewing Extreme Ownership, the book, later this month. It's going to be, we're shooting for the 4th Thursday, but we'll release more of that info later. For the general intro to this, leadership is a controversial, volatile topic because the truth will inevitably offend people. I mean, egos are going to be bruised, but this is something that needs to be addressed. I mean, it can be applied to everyday life, your relationships, but especially within public service. And in this case, we're talking specifically EMS. Because ineffective and inappropriate leadership is crushing thousands of providers. To summarize, becoming a servant to the mission while orchestrating the effective execution of that mission via the team. So, what all does that mean? When we're talking about becoming a servant to the mission, that's the first part of it. You need to have a mission laid out for your team. And with that, you need to be orchestrating not just your team doing a thing, but then being an effective team executing what it takes to make that mission happen. So when unpacking, first of all, what is authentic leadership? It's free. It doesn't cost anything to be a good leader. You don't have to have a lot of resources, a lot of toys, a lot of money to be an effective leader, be an authentic leader. It only takes 3 things. When you break down authentic leadership down to its core, it requires 3 things. The first is trust. The second is connection, and the third is a common goal. That's it. It's simple and straightforward. And ultimately, leadership, this is really going to bother some people probably when saying this, but polarizing is good because it makes people think. Leadership at its core is positive manipulation. Okay, people are scared of the word manipulation because we always think of it in terms of something negative. But ultimately, when you break down manipulation, what does the word mean? It's getting people to achieve a certain end. That's what you're doing. That's what being a leader is you're trying to take a group of people and rally them together around something to make something happen. Now, you can have negative manipulation, which ultimately is you're trying to get people to do stuff and sacrifice their time and resources and family life and everything to better you. But positive manipulation is simply saying, hey, we're going to create a value exchange here. If you are able to do this and this and this and this and get us to this goal, then here's the value exchange that we have. Here's what you receive, how this benefits you short-term and long-term. So to achieve authentic leadership, we talked about the 3 parts: trust, connection, and a common goal. With trust has to be earned. Okay, so as a leader, you don't just walk into a room and assume that everyone's going to trust you. You need to assume that no one's going to trust you. Because right now, most people don't trust leaders. They don't trust people who are promoted. They don't trust people who wear, around here we call them the white shirts. That's pretty much your default. So, but even when you're not in that situation, as a leader, you have to earn trust. You also have to create connection with people. You're not just going to build a connection with those people on your team
by just being passive, by just being present. You have to actually engage with them. You have to create that connection. Doesn't mean you need to be the best friends. Doesn't mean you need to go drinking on the weekends. Doesn't mean you need to come to all the family gatherings. It just means that you need to have some level of connection with them. They see you're a human, and that your opinion means something to them. Your goals mean something.
I think an interesting point that kind of goes along with this, and again, we'll touch more about this in the book review, but extreme ownership brings up a fact that the act of being a leader, especially in a supervisor position, you should, as a provider, respect that role. But at the same time, the leader or the supervisor should not automatically assume that they have unending, unyielding respect and, control and all the rest of it. You still should be working towards earning that respect. Does that make sense? Like you should give the respect, but you should also assume you have no respect and be earning it with your people.
Because in a way, it's not transactional strictly. It's not like, okay, well, I did X, therefore they need to do Y. There's a process, an ongoing process of continuing to earn the trust and continuing to create the connection. And the more you're doing that, you are going to guide them towards that third part, which is a common goal. If you're just trying to shove people towards a common goal and say, hey, we all need to get here. Okay, if you haven't created connection, if you haven't earned trust, you might get something out of those people, but you're not going to get what you need.
People also want a why.
Yes, especially this generation of workers. Because let's face it, everybody loves to shit on millennials and everything after.
Well, the interesting thing, just as a little sidebar, it's funny that the current younger people right now, like 18, a lot of times the older generations will lump them with millennials when actually technically millennial generation was cut off at 96. So we're actually, older technically, but sorry, that's a little sidebar. That irritates me sometimes.
Well, the gap in generational values is a whole separate topic that we will have an episode on. I don't have an exact date for it when, but we are going to dig into that because that's a big deal. That's a big reason why we're seeing such a weird turnover in EMS, because the principles of how EMS is being run now are pretty much the same as they were in the 70s and 80s.
The good old boy system.
Well, but not just the good old boy system. I mean, yes, that is incredibly prevalent, especially around here. We still see it all the time. But it's not even as malicious as that is. Just there's a different expectation. There's a different understanding of the employer-employee relationship that's just not sustainable anymore. It's not working for this generation. And I think if more employers fixed that, then you would have a lot more loyalty. And the way you create loyalty is the same. It ties into authentic leadership. You create loyalty by earning trust, by creating connection, and bringing everybody to that common goal.
And communication. I will say, I think I forgot to mention in the intro thing, along with my in the field work, I'm also in education, and I have several instructor certifications, all the rest of it. Well, yesterday, actually, I was taking another instructor course so I can get an additional certification, and the generational commitment and communication, everything was specifically brought up for each generation. It even included the baby boomers, that there's a certain way to go about education, teaching, and even communication that was literally broken down by generation. And tying back into communication, explaining the why is going to have the providers buy into your general common goal. And
really, you summed it up well there, that communication is what makes all of these things work. You don't earn trust with people if you don't communicate with them. You don't create connection if you don't communicate with them. If they don't even know what your goal is, if you don't communicate that to them, how do you expect them to get you there? And I think a lot of times people just assume certain things, and when those assumptions aren't being met, those silent expectations are not being met, they get frustrated and angry and more heavy-handed, and it just causes more problems.
I think it also has to do with how you communicate, because some people effective versus ineffective leaders
Mm-hmm.
are going to say, well, I communicate this to you. Okay, but how?
Yes. And that's also where the positive manipulation part comes in. Because really, as a leader, in a way, you're being a salesman. In a way, you have to demonstrate to me as the underling, as the employee, the other team member, you have to not sell yourself in a transactional way, but you have to pitch yourself and your goals and everything to me. So it's incumbent on the leader not to assume anything, but to communicate and communicate correctly rather than just barking at people saying, hey, I realize that maybe I didn't communicate this effectively before, but here's the expectation, here's what I'm working towards, and here's what I want us to achieve. So you have to have that effective communication in place for any of this to work. If you hide out in your office, if your people only, see you at the Christmas party or whatever, you're not being an effective leader. You have to be out amongst your people. And that doesn't mean you need to spend all day, every day, driving around the stations, saying hey to everybody. But you have to have some exposure. You have to have some meaningful interaction with your team. If you have a big team, okay, you might have to just focus more on your lower levels of management and spending time with them and communicating with them and building that relationship with them so they can in turn do that with the rest of the people.
So as applicable as all that is, we also need to touch into being individual providers. You are still a leader. Whether you're an EMT or a paramedic, a critical care paramedic, a shift supervisor, a field training officer, we all individually in certain situations are leaders. Whether you're on a BLS truck, an ALS truck, critical care, anything, everybody should be personally accountable for themselves. I would like to read a quote from the Army Doctrine publication number 6-22. It reads, "A leader is anyone who by virtue of assumed role or assigned responsibility inspires and influences people by providing purpose, direction, and motivation to accomplish the mission and improve the organization." I mean, that right there is literally anybody. I mean, let's take paramedics for example. I mean, Daniel and I are both paramedics. We're speaking to EMS as a whole. Paramedics innately are leaders and are personally accountable. Being personally accountable is a prereq for leadership. Based on the Army Doctrine publication quote, basic practice, paramedics are leaders. The extent and involvement of leadership is going to vary depending on responsibility, assumed roles, and everything else. A paramedic on a paramedic EMT truck, both are going to have roles and responsibilities. Daniel and I were talking actually on the way to record this podcast. What if you have a cardiac arrest? The EMT can take leadership of their core responsibilities at their level to take leadership, and if they have fire that is helping them, they can direct how things need to go so the paramedic who does have higher level can take care of their things. I just ran a critical care call the other day that they were dealing with pressors that are above my scope, but I was able to start with push dose that is within my scope. We each are able to take leadership at our degree. Good leaders have a high degree of personal accountability. It is an absolute requirement for any leadership position. So my question to you is, in order to hold others accountable as a leader, is it not responsible to first hold yourself accountable? Like I said, this applies to EMTs as well, whether you're an EMT on a cardiac arrest with a paramedic or you're an EMT on a BLS truck. Having the mentality to have personal accountability is so important. It serves to ultimately bring about better and more consistent patient care, which is ultimately EMS's objective. Consistent patient care.
And dovetailing with that, something you mentioned with humility. Yes, we have big egos in this job. We are big personalities. If you're not an alpha, on some level, you're not going to do well in this job.
No.
Because it doesn't even mean that you need to be top dog. You just need to be able to assert yourself. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, and this is a tangent, that's something that really means something to me, is very, very important to me, because I've seen so many paramedics who mistreat their EMTs. They browbeat them and shove them down and won't let them do anything because they don't trust them, but they don't give them the opportunity to earn that trust either. They don't let them make mistakes. You learn by mistakes. I'm sorry, if you're a paramedic, you've made some mistakes. Period, the end. If you're walking around saying you've never done anything wrong, you are a liar. And I will take you to court over that. You were lying. Doesn't mean that you're a bad provider. It doesn't mean that you've never done anything right. It just means we've all made mistakes. We're human. We need to accept that. And when it comes to the topic of leadership, it's important to realize that your way may not always be the best way. And when you can bear that in mind, you can take leadership, you can lay out a plan. If you're the most senior person in charge, you can be like, hey, here's what I want to do. Here's the way I think this should happen. If someone else says, hey, I hear you, but I have an idea to do this a little bit better. Okay, cool. Awesome. I don't care. If you don't have to do it my way. The what's important is that it gets done correctly and that the patient outcomes are better, or whatever the context is for where you're working. If you're in fire department, if you're on a complicated call, you need to give the people on your team space to exercise their own thinking, their own opinions, and act on them. Maybe they're going to make mistakes. They might not do it as well as you. But you know what? If you give them the space to do it, they will learn.
I will say on that topic, and this could be an entirely other podcast, part of it starts at education.
Michelle's really passionate about education, if you can't tell. Just
well,
a heads up.
Not just that, but just the whole, like, we're going to shove the EMTs through a 5-week program. Like, if you're going through med school and stuff, like, that's, you know, if they're not going to be actively in the field, I guess that could be okay. But, like, any of these services and everything else that thinks you can adequately be an EMT in 4 to 5 weeks is just downright ridiculous.
No.
But it starts with education, but also you're learning the basics. The real training is when you hit the truck. Mm-hmm. And just a few months ago, within the past few months, I have had brand new EMT, you know, came out of a wonderful program, knows the basics, but when you start talking about, like, here, spike a bag or do this, or, you know, help me with this, you know, we have an airway problem, you know, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. If you pair them with an old, salty provider that is like, you know, oh, I can't be bothered to train you, or this or that, all the rest of it. The point is, you should be a leader, you should use, you know, effective communication for a common goal. Mm-hmm. And you should be training on a non-critical call, especially ALS calls. You should be teaching that EMT, even if you're taking an extra 5-10 minutes, teach them, you know, if you want them to draw out meds or if you want them to spike a bag, because if you train them appropriately on the non-critical calls, they will be able to be leaders and effective team members on the oh shit calls. And the fact that we're just, like, kicking, you know, these young kids down, some of us snicker that EMTB, you know, the running joke is it means empty my trash, bitch. But there are some old salty providers that literally look at some of these younger providers like that, and that is not being an effective team. It's not an effective leader.
And I will say this, I guess you could say it's a cautionary thing. I was one of those EMTs that I really cared about my job. Mm-hmm. Like, I was green as could be. I'd never done this. My family has never done anything medical, was never exposed to this, like, ever. But I really wanted to do it right. I was so excited about this. I mean, this was my thing. You do not want to be that paramedic who shits on an EMT like that, because they will spend the rest of their career proving you wrong. And they will remember every single thing you said to them. They will use you as an example of what not to do. Because I can think it's very specifically, not many people, I mean, there were people I didn't like. There were people I didn't get along with. But there were 1 or 2 people that they really, it wasn't even that they lit a fire under my ass. It was more of just a, like, okay, fuck you. Fuck you and the horse you rode in on. I'm going to show you that I'm going to own this shit. I'm going to do better than you. And so the point of that story is, don't be that provider. Take the time. If you're on an oh shit call and you can't teach, take a breath. Because however much stress you're under, that EMT is under 10 times more.
They're freaking out. They don't know how to help.
And they're looking to you to set the tone. And so don't be that guy. If nothing more, you teach them how to keep their cool and how to respond appropriately, because this is not their emergency. This isn't your emergency. That's not your job to get worked up. So I know we kind of gotten off on a tangent here from leadership, but this is the point of this podcast, is we want to deal with these things that we all know, we all relate to, and we all have experienced. So if you're an advanced provider, have some humility, remember where you came from, treat those people with respect, even if they don't care about doing their job correctly. Guess what? They may, if they see that you treat them with respect, because they may have only seen, prior to you, they may have only seen providers that treated them like shit. And so now you may be the person that makes them take the job seriously. So look at those opportunities that way.
Well, and you bring up your story of, wanting to prove somebody wrong. When I was in Arkansas and going through school and everything, I considered going to paramedic school there. And I actually had the program director, there was a whole chain of events or whatever, but I requested a meeting to discuss something about school. And long story short, he straight up told me that he did not think that I was going to make it through paramedic school, and if I did, that I would flame out and never be good at my job. Mm-hmm. And no, I don't think that I am the best, in my field, not even in my job. I know that for a fact that I am not. I have plenty to learn, and I'm continuing to learn and do the best that I can. But you know what? I can still say that I'm damn good at my job, and he was completely wrong. But somebody like that those kind of words stick with people, especially when it's somebody you think you look up to, which again tracks back to authentic leadership, building trust, having that connection, having a common goal, and communication. Because you know what, whether it's in a relationship, within coworkers or, management, anybody, words stick with people. Words and communication stick with people. It either do really good or really bad. And you know what? If we keep shitting on providers as a whole, because it happens with paramedics too, mm-hmm. That is why we have such high turnover within this field too. Mm-hmm. Yes, there is a general influx of people. And sure, a portion of it, kids are going to, higher level education like med school and blah, blah, blah. But our retention, especially with the younger generation, is god-awful because of our treatment. But with what it looks like and what we want to achieve,
it's easy for us to sit and talk shit and say, okay, well, you need to have trust, you need to have a connection, you need to have a common goal. Well, how do we do that? And it's not rocket science. We just don't have the discussion that much. When it comes to building trust, the way you do that is actively and purposefully building trust through action. And more often than not, that action needs to be the result of active listening. If you are actively listening to your people, to their needs, whether it's them personally or professionally, if they feel that they're being heard and that at least some portion of what they are saying is being acted upon, even if it's just hey, I understand what you're saying, I understand what you mean, but here's why we can't do that, and elaborate. Don't just be like, well, we can't do that. Okay, that does nobody any good. That says to me, when you just go, oh, blah, 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 that says you didn't listen. You didn't care. You heard me saying something different than you, and you just blew it off. And that's not going to work. So you build the trust through action. Then when it comes to connection, you actively and purposefully create connection through service and investment. As a leader, whether you are actually like a elected leader, or someone who is officially in a position of leadership, or just anyone who's on the street, you should be investing in the people around you in some way, shape, or form. You should be on some level serving them. No, you don't need to walk around hand and foot and wash their feet. No. But if I feel, let's spin it around. If I feel that a leader is actively investing in my well-being and my education, in my professional development, and I feel that they are actively trying to provide some service to me, that's going to create a connection. I'm going to feel like, okay, this person isn't just a pressed suit in an office. They are actually coming out and caring about me. And I realize that in larger organizations, one specifically that we both work for, that's not always feasible. You can't always have a director form unique personal relationships with 300 or 400 people. It's just not going to happen. But that leader should be forming those relationships with the other members of the leadership team, of that lower management level, and building that relationship with them and setting those expectations of them, creating that connection with them, building trust with them, and create a culture where that's the expectation. And so those others, quote, lower leaders, I don't mean that in a derogatory way, just, up, down, they can go and do that with the people on their team, on their shift. So instead of one person having to do it with 400 people, you have a bunch of people doing it with teams of 15 to 20 people. That's much more feasible.
Well, and something else, again, that we'll talk about later with extreme ownership is they talk about to have this, communication, personable situations, taking action and kind of getting to know your people. The rule of thumb is about 5 to 6 people to lead, have not personalities, but the connections with, is really the max ability.
Mm-hmm.
As we get older, we joke that, our friend groups kind of drop off and everything, and that's for various reasons. But in general, if you think about it, when you talk about like good, close friends, you're going to have a primary like 5 or 6 people. Well, same with leadership. The director may have like 5 or 6 subordinates, not, again, derogatory, but just in the leader ladder.
Chain of command.
Chain of command, there we go. So like if you have a shift supervisor, depending on how large that shift is, having one training officer or certified.
Different people call it different names. You've got...
Yeah, there's various names for it. But point being, if you have one training officer for 20 people, someone's going to fall through the cracks. You really should have like one training officer for every like 5 providers. And this and that, all the rest of it, which, in, web, per se, you will be able to have those personal connections in some form or fashion, be able to take action. And when you're getting information funneled up the chain of command, problems and communication will be more streamlined.
And again, we're dealing with something where I understand there's limits and resources for people, and sometimes they might not be able to get approval for certain, structural changes or whatnot. But you can still try. You can still do something. But it needs to be personable. There needs to be some level of connection. Because without that connection, if I don't feel connected to you, if I don't trust you, if I'm not connected to you, your criticism isn't going to mean anything because you didn't try to do anything for me when I was doing right. Well, if I do something wrong, I'm still really not going to care what you have to say, personally, on a personal level. And so I feel like that's where we fall short a lot in EMS, is we live by kind of a no news is good news mentality. We need to stop that. We need to be more proactive in our communication before things go wrong, not just when they go wrong.
Well, that goes with training and QAs, for example. We have a training officer that tries, he's like absolutely drowning under QAs, but, tries to give positive feedback. If he reads a QA and he's like, man, you did a good job on this call, blah, blah, blah. It's like when you need, direction on a call, like there's something you could have done better, it's like you accept it. Leaders should also have tact in their communication. They should have more tact. Like, Don't be a leader that lets yourself and your leadership decisions be run by emotion.
Yeah. And I mean, we're human creatures. We're going to be emotional, but I think
you can have emotion. It's what you do with it. Everyone's going to feel emotion.
Well, and again, it comes down to, do you have enough humility to realize that your assessment of somebody might be wrong, or that you missed something? And if you're spending time investing in somebody, and again, it doesn't have to be like, like you're trying to date them or whatever. Just build some level of familiarity with somebody. Be aware of who they are, of what's important to them, because they may be dealing with shit that has nothing to do with you, has nothing to do with this job, has nothing to do ultimately with the quality of their care, of their performance as an employee. But if you're not aware of shit going on in people's lives, then you're going to have no context for dealing with them when there's a crisis mode. So we've gone through building trust through action, creating connection through service and investment. And the third component of how to enact this authentic leadership is actively and purposefully leading from wherever you need to. So that doesn't mean that you necessarily need to be on the front lines all the time. It's not like, if you're an EMS director, the only way you can lead people is by showing up on calls all day, every day. No. But you can't lead just from the office either. You need to have some sensitivity to where your people are, where they need you to be, and go there, be there. So if you're an actual supervisor, director, administrator, however it is, find out where there's a hole and go there, lead your people from there. If you need to be hanging out in the break room with them and getting to know them that way, cool. If you need to go on more calls with them, go ride calls in, cool, go do that. It's going to depend on the needs of your people and your service, but ultimately your default posture should be, hey, I will do anything, whatever it takes, to lead my people effectively.
I will say I've worked for a couple places across my entire career where if you are either down multiple trucks or you can be fully staffed, but for some reason you are drowning in calls at that particular time. I have had directors start running calls, whether it's, director and supervisor, or, some kind of combination, or director and, EMT or something, will jump on a truck for, a whole shift, maybe just a couple hours, whatever, to help with calls. I have so much respect for that, because they're not just yelling down at y'all that, we need to turn calls faster, we need to do this, need to do that, all the rest of it. There's so much respect there, versus I have worked for a place at some point in my career that you can be down 5, 6, literally 7 trucks in your fleet, and all, how many ever people, supervisors, whatever title in the front office, are just like, y'all need to turn calls faster, like, get your shit together. And it's like, you're certified too, like, we are literally trying. There's only so much you can do at a certain point. That that follows along with lead wherever you need to. That is being connected with your team and understanding what is going on.
Well, and on that tangent, I remember back during COVID, the place that I was working full-time, we were getting spanked just all day, every day. Everybody was getting reamed. And it was not uncommon during the middle of the day. You would hear our, executive director and one of the other administrators both get on a truck together and go run vent calls. Like, there was no inhibition to getting down and doing that level of grunt work. And thankfully, I've never experienced this personally, but I've seen people who work for places that have mandatory overtime, and this will maybe offend some people, hurt some feelings. I don't really give a fuck, because it's the truth. If your entire leadership staff is not already out on trucks or whatever your particular, whether you're fire department, EMS, whatever, if you're not out already on trucks, you have zero business forcing other people to stay.
Well, let me tell you something. I have worked for a place that required mandatory overtime. And you know what? It changes the provider's mentality as well. If they don't see leadership on the truck helping with these calls, the providers are going to start going slower on purpose to get a break. Because we all have been there. There are times where you're at the hospital, literally in the same breath that you're clearing and dispatch is confirming, dispatch is telling you got another call. And, you know, whether you're a white cloud, black cloud, whatever, it could be, you know, a bullshit call or it could be an oh shit call. And, you know, it comes to a point where crews are going to start slowing down, especially on the mandatory overtime, because they didn't choose that. You know, maybe it's a day that I had planned to do something fun with my kids, and that level of not understanding and everything now don't get me wrong, if they need help and I am asked and I'm like, I will do this for you, you know, that's one thing, especially if supervisors or, you know, upper management is doing it. But it's almost like the armchair quarterback type situation. If you have upper management, you know, requiring mandatory overtime, doing this, and this, it changes the mentality.
And that is a very easy way to demonstrate the concept of leading from wherever you need to. And I know that if I was in a situation where I had to be enforced overtime, I mean, one, I probably wouldn't go work there to begin with, because I think I think that goes against every principle of leadership, period, is being able to tell your people, hey, we are more important than your personal life. That's just not ethical, and that's ineffective, and that's not going to earn any loyalty. That's not going to build any trust. It's not going to create any connection. It's just going to make things worse. However, if I was at a place like that and I saw that every single member of brass was on the truck, even if they weren't getting paid extra, even if they're salaried and they're there, you know what? I wouldn't be mad about it. At least not as much. I'd probably be upset because I wouldn't be, you know, you'd be taking me away from whatever was going on in my life. But I wouldn't be upset at those leaders because I'd see they're doing the same thing. They're taking away time from their families. They're willingly taking a pay cut, probably, to come out and do that. So
I have more respect for that.
Yes. And trust and respect go together. You trust somebody, you're probably going to respect the hell out of them. I mean, you really can't respect somebody you don't trust. Not truly respect somebody. You can have a general sense of respect, like, oh yeah, I respect the office of the President of the United States, but really don't go beyond that.
Yeah.
But these are the kinds of conversations we need to have, and maybe it sounds redundant because it's kind of the pop culture topic right now, but we need to define what authentic leadership is. We need to know, what does this look like? How do we go about doing this? We also really need to unpack, and I mean, if it hasn't been obvious already, we need to unpack, why is this so important? It's very easy to sit back and say, oh, well, that person's a bad leader, or this person's a good leader, and I kind of feel that particular terminology is actually not helpful in this situation. Now, and I'm not trying to be politically correct or anything, but the end goal is we want things to be better. We want people to want to work together. We want to bring people together. We don't want management and field staff at war with each other. This isn't, if you're coming to this podcast thinking that we're going to just validate the little guys and say, fuck management, that's not how this is going to work. Because if you don't have effective leadership up top, then it's all for naught. And if you don't have people doing the job well and being taken care of and happy and healthy, then it's also all for naught. So this isn't about pointing fingers or placing blame. This is something that all of us need to care about. So I look at it as, instead of good versus bad leadership, I look at it as effective versus ineffective leadership. If you're an effective leader, you're building that trust, you're creating connection, you're leading your people, and you can't not get where you're going. You can't not have success if you're doing that. And most people aren't all effective or all ineffective. Most people are somewhere in the middle, and most who aren't effective aren't even being malicious about it. They may have just had incompetent or incomplete role models, and they're just trying to mimic what they thought was the right thing to do. And so that's another reason I think it's important to think of this in terms of effective versus ineffective. Because this isn't an attack. This isn't saying, oh, you're a horrible person. It just says, hey, here's some things we can change and tweak and improve on for the betterment of the team and for improving patient care, provider care, the success of the department, all of it.
To kind of piggyback on what you're saying, you can have a leader and, pick a role in your mind, you're thinking of somebody, but you can have a leader that is a good person, is not malicious, cares about you, all the rest of it, but for whatever reason per situation is an ineffective leader. Relating back to maliciousness. And as he said, like with this podcast, someone at every level, EMT, advanced EMT, or intermediate, whatever we're calling them nowadays, paramedic, critical care, supervisors, everybody, someone is going to get offended at every level. The whole point with this and the discussion is a rounded advancing on improving the culture as a whole. Because like we said, an EMT can be a leader too. It's not just about management. Because management and leadership, you can manage up and you can manage down depending on the situation. And that's the biggest thing. And unfortunately, you have incomplete or incompetent role models at every level.
And the goal isn't to become one type of leader versus another. There's a lot of terms thrown around about, are you an autocratic leader? Are you a democratic leader? Are you a transactional leader? That's not the point. Because think about it in terms of being a parent. Because I'm sure there's a lot of you listening that are parents, have multiple kids. You, have a consistent standard for what you expect of your children, but each of them is going to have unique needs and attitudes, and you need to treat them a little bit differently depending on who they are. That's not a bad thing. That's not a two-faced thing. That's just life. And being a leader of any kind, whether you're on paper a leader or not, is no different. You need to read the room, read your team, and see who's got what strengths and weaknesses, and play to those. Some people on your team may be better at certain things than you, and you need to acknowledge that and act like that and not take it personally. It's just it takes effort, which is why a lot of people don't care. A lot of people just want to say, well, I'm just this kind of leader. This is the way I always make decisions, this is the way I always lead. That does not be any good, because you're eventually going to you're eventually going to put a cap on the effectiveness of your team. Because you are limiting yourself, therefore you're going to limit everybody else below you as well. The biggest question I see, the biggest objection coming up is, well, how do I deal with ineffective leaders? Well, the simple answer is lead. You don't have to be promoted to have a different colored uniform and have, the butter bars on your collar to be a leader. You step up, you take initiative, you do your job well. And I know we all struggle with this because we're all burned out. We're exhausted. Call volumes are at an all-time high everywhere. We're tired. We don't give a crap. We have compassion fatigue, all of that stuff. I get it. But at the bare minimum, you should be able to treat people with respect. You should be able to do quality patient care. You should be able to do your reports, keep your truck in decent shape. That's not hard to do. That doesn't cost you anything personally. It's an expectation of your job. And if you're doing those things consistently, you build that consistency, people are going to see that you are demonstrating that you are trustworthy and that you're capable and that you're focused on the objective mission. What you do when you're home, nobody cares about. Nobody gives a shit. We care about what you do when you're playing with the team. People like to cop out and say, well, because I'm not a leader, I ain't got to do shit. Because I don't get paid extra, I don't have to do shit. And I understand that. That's a problem in EMS as well. We don't pay for quality, we pay for presence. We're not paid extra to be good or loyal or anything. We're paid for the hours we show up. Or the number of years that we've put in, which does not equal quality on its own. You have people who are young providers, who are incredibly smart and intelligent and effective providers. And you have people who have been medics for 20, 30 years and are just not that competent.
I think something else that plays into this is ego, because you have some providers that are like, well, if I'm not getting acknowledged, then, I'm not going to keep trying, or, who gives a shit? And like, when talking about taking initiative, being a leader, leading up and down the ladder and all the rest of it, we should have pride in what we do. When somebody asks you what your job is, I am a paramedic. And like, I've met some people that, take a little bit of issue with that, we shouldn't identify by our job. But in an essence, the culture and what we do, because so many other general people don't understand what we do, it is kind of our identity. It's what we do. We should have identities outside of it to try and help with compassion fatigue, but I'm slightly sidestepping. Sorry, I'm slightly sidestepping. There are many facets to that would be an interesting discussion. But the point is, with initiative and leadership, let's go back to an example of, I'm a paramedic with an EMT on a cardiac arrest. I give my assignments as a leader to all the providers. My partner is an EMT, let's say, they're on airway for whatever reason. They should be a leader, take initiative, and be proud of the fact that this patient needs a good airway. This patient needs a certain end tidal, oxygen and all the rest of it. You should take leadership of your situation, and eventually, if every individual person of a crew, of a shift, of an entire organization makes these little changes, eventually you will have a culture change. Take the initiative to care and be a leader on your own. You don't have to be, as you said, old white shirt to take leadership of your calls, your truck, or your job, as an EMR on a cardiac arrest, whatever your job is.
And a lot of times the people who hate being on the job the most are the ones who are solely focused on themselves. And I get it. You have stuff going on at home. You have your own shit to deal with. I love to be able to come to work, and if I'm not on a call, I can be reading, doing whatever I want. I enjoy that downtime, and it means something to me. I'm not saying you have to be all gung-ho, let's go run calls. But you have to, when you're at work, your job is to stay focused on the mission. In essence, fuck your ego. Whether you are an actual official, I don't want to say actual, whether you're an official leader or an unofficial leader, the success or failure of a leader is defined by the success or failure of the team. It doesn't matter. You're on a complicated call. Stuff goes sideways. You're the one in charge. It's your responsibility. Negative patient outcome, that falls on you. So that doesn't mean suddenly be a tyrant on calls. That means you need to be ensuring that you are treating everybody on that call, on your crew, with respect. And even in that short period of time, demonstrating that you care about the final outcome more than your own personal convenience. Because I hate to say it, when you're at work, your job is to run calls. Period. I mean, I love sitting at the station and marathoning through shows and stuff as much as anybody. But at the end of the day, your job is to run calls and take care of patients. And I feel like we've lost some sense of that. And sure, it's fun to complain and gripe and like, man, it's been a rough day. Everybody needs to calm down. Like, this will offend people who aren't in public service to hear this, but literally, often, our thought is, fuck people. We're just going to be honest about that. That's the reality of what runs through our heads. It doesn't mean that we're going to try and kill you. It doesn't mean that we're going to abuse you. It just means we're tired. We have compassion fatigue. We're wore out.
Agreed on all of it. But in general, I think, and this is for the general public if you're listening, so many people are using 911 because they think it'll bypass triage, and they're calling for the stupidest fucking stuff, which is going to add to clogging of the EMS system, the hospitals, and compassion fatigue. I think 2 or 3 Christmases ago, yes, I worked 911. Statistically, I could have gotten a call at any time, but my kids were supposed to come see me Christmas Eve. We were going to have cookies and milk, and we got a call. Fine, nature of the job. But you want to know what that call was? A local pedophile with a toothache.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that because he told me all about the fetishes all the way to the hospital. And you know what? That wears on people. And he was a frequent caller too. Called like, 3-4 days a week for these stupidest things. Not even emergencies.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that may offend people, but I mean, that's just the reality of what's going on. But it all comes back to also how you communicate. You may be communicating, but if you're like, barking orders at somebody, it's going to put a negative tone to the entire day. If you are with somebody, now don't be wrong, we all like to bitch about the job. It's been a hard day, oh my God, there's another call. But we all can think about one person that has nothing good to say. Like you walk in the room and they are, what do you call them, energy vampires?
Yeah, energy vampires. They suck the energy out of the room.
Yeah, in a not good way. You do have providers, whether they've done it for 6 months or 16 years, that think they know everything and they try to act above their certification level. We all need to be personally accountable, have appropriate communication, and lead from where we're at.
And with that, something we're all famous for, and that I have been this way too, plenty of times, I would run my mouth and bitch and gripe about anything and everything. But I think that, and I'm not saying you were bitching and griping, that just triggered a thought of mine, that we get so caught up in what we don't like, what's going wrong, what's fucked up about where we work, about our shift, what happened on this bad call. We're so obsessed with complaining and bitching. We don't recognize the good things that happen, even when they're right in front of us. We've gotten off on a lot of tangents, but we're talking about leadership in this field. And we're so quick, so damn quick to complain about our leaders. And maybe justly so. But I have two questions. One, do you truly understand the full nature of their job and of what they have to do? Have you taken the time to think about any change in policy, maybe about something more than your personal convenience? It might still be a bad choice, but you need to evaluate from, hey, I need to know what I don't know. That's number one. Number two is, have you praised them for the things they've done right? Have you sat back and honestly said, you know what? I may not like this motherfucker. He may get on my nerves. The way he talks may give me a headache, whatever. But have you actually taken the time to sit down and say, hey, you know what? They're doing this right, or they're doing that right. They're trying. Have you told them that? Have you said, hey, I appreciate whatever that thing was you did. You came up and you brought, Red Bulls up to the ER, or you came and you swept out a truck after we had a shitty call, and scrubbed the floors with a toothbrush. Like, have you ever gone and thanked them for stuff?
It's positive reinforcement.
Yes, because as humans, we are going to do the behavior that we are rewarded for doing. And obviously, you can have a complex discussion about reward systems and feedback loops and so on and so forth. But to simplify, in the context of leadership, if I as a leader and go out of my way, say, you know what, I haven't been doing so great lately. Let me try and do whatever this thing is. And maybe it's something that I should have been doing the whole time, but it just wasn't on my radar. So I go and I try and do something, and all I get is bitching and griping. Or nothing. Okay, yes, it may be the right thing to do, and I should still do it anyway. But what motivation am I going to have to keep doing it? And I think we're really shooting ourselves in the foot as an industry because we're so focused on bitching and griping and complaining about change that nobody's actually willing to do the fucking work together, because we can't just do this on our own. This is a group effort. This is a group project that requires everyone to be on the same page. That takes work. And I'm not saying that EMS needs to become your life. I am the biggest proponent of, as soon as I clock out from work, I forget that I'm a paramedic. And that's not because I don't like my job. I love being a paramedic. But I have to create some division in my brain where I can leave work at work and I can go home and I can be me. So I'm not saying that EMS needs to take over your life, but I'm saying when you're there, yeah, it's your priority right then and right there. I know we talk about, it's kind of popular to talk about the military, even for those of us who haven't been in the military. But it's a relatable example. Think about Navy, you pick which one you want, Navy SEALs, Rangers, whoever. No, they don't come home and go run a tactical mission to Walmart to get groceries. They don't. They have some separation. However, they still have an identity and an expectation. And when those guys are deployed, they're holding each other accountable. They're mission focused. They're focused on success of the team, and they're investing in each other. They're doing the right thing every time. And yeah, they make mistakes too. I'm not trying to idolize these people. They're not gods. But that's very much what we need in EMS, and what we're lacking is there's no consistent identity. There's no vision for EMS. There's no set of core values for EMS that we can hold each other accountable to. So that's, to kind of wrap it up here a little bit, that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to say, hey, we see these problems just like you do. It's very real. The solution to this is coming together and rallying around a vision and enforcing core values. And ultimately doing that so that we can survive as an industry. We're dying. Well, I was just going to be completely honest. This industry is a sinking ship. Sure, we have wonderful protocols, developments in medicine. Things are going great in that sense. But culturally, we're dying.
Well, I mean, we touched on it briefly. I mean, retention with the new incoming. I think I saw at one point, now, don't quote me exactly, I can't remember where this was. I'm sure there are going to be different studies that have different opinions. But I mean, 6 years ago, the retention of career was like 3 to 5 years, I think. Mm-hmm. And now it's down to like 1 to 3. And I mean, that's been within, the past 5 years. And it's just continuing. We see it with new hires in these younger generations. Mm-hmm. To build on, and I know we're trying to wrap it up, but something that Daniel had touched on that made me think of this, whether you're an EMT, paramedic, critical care, upper management, anything, to make these changes, no. We're not saying that there is one huge motion that is going to completely change this industry as a whole, no. But building on, like, doing positive reinforcement on micro habits and changes. Little things build up to big changes over time. Mm-hmm.
It's about changing the habits, changing the mindset, because you can't create a new policy and suddenly have authentic leadership. It's something that is a discussion, takes time. We were talking earlier, I've probably logged easily well over 1,000 hours or more in studying these topics. And no, I've never been like a labeled, supervisor at a service or whatever. I'm a parent. I've had to learn some things of being a parent. Being a parent is the one thing I try the hardest not to suck at. The principles are all the same. And there's, if you don't have a vision for where you want your family to go, if you don't have a set of core values that you hold everybody accountable to in your home, it's going to be a mess. But if you have some semblance of a vision, a direction that you want for your family to go, if you have some level of values that everybody's held accountable to, then that makes your life as a parent much, much, much easier. It's a lot of work. It's hard. It's not easy in that sense. But you're going to have a better quality relationship with your kids because they respond to that structure if you're consistent. Same thing happens with your employees. If you do the right thing the right way every time, awesome. And if you mess up, communicate. Tell your people, hey, you know what? I've sucked at this. Here's what I've done, how I failed. You own up to it. Lead by the example. Don't go sit down and say, okay, you need to be, all of you need to be better leaders. No, you set the tone and say, hey, here's the changes I'm going to implement. Here's what I want to see happen. I'm taking the leadership here. You either get on board with this or you're gone.
I will say, Daniel and I have a passion about this. We love medicine, love being paramedics, all the rest of it. And we, may have a bad day and bitch and gripe and all the rest of it, just like anybody.
Absolutely.
But the point is not making a habit of that and letting it take over our personality and our patient care. But the point of this is, as we're going through this podcast, we are continuing to absorb materials and learn and listen to other podcasts and read material. That's part of, the monthly books and themes and everything. We're not just preaching because, it's something to talk about or bitch about. We are implementing things that we learn in our lives as well, whether it's our relationship, what it's our children or, something at work. But the point is, and the reason I think a lot of people turn away from this is it is uncomfortable as fuck. Even if you are a good person, you are going to find something, read something, hear something that is make you think, oh shit, maybe I'm not as good at this as I think I am. Everybody, whether it's an EMS, your job, your personal life, parenting, you should never plateau. There's always something that you can improve. No one is ever going to be perfect. No one is ever going to know everything. I mean, I think anybody can agree that even doctors don't know everything. There is a reason for specialty. Everyone is going to mess up at some point. It's having the humility, but also the empathy. And the problem with empathy and sympathy is compassion fatigue. But regardless of that, there are outlets that healthy outlets that we should follow. But we need to not have compassion fatigue for each other. And again, all this relates back to leadership. Leadership, not just supervisors, but even all the way down to the EMTs. Everybody can be a leader in certain situations.
So I know we've taken you guys on quite an adventure over the last hour.
Oh no, it has not been.
Yeah. Which is fine. I mean, I personally enjoy this length of time. I know we're taking on a bunch of rabbit holes, and I hope that, like Michelle said, it's not that we're up here preaching because we have it all figured out. No. We all fuck up. We all struggle with these things. We all have bad days. So I'm not trying to be here. We're not trying to be here to beat you over the head and say, you're an idiot. We're out here to say, hey, there is a better way. There is a better option for us. We're having the conversation now. We're getting everybody thinking about it. We want this to be a discussion. This is supposed to be growth. We're supposed to evolve. Our industry needs to evolve, and we're not evolving right now. We're suffering. So us being up here and speaking bluntly and passionately and everything is meant to stir up these things and say, hey, we need to stop settling for the status quo. We need to stop just accepting that misery is the way to be in this job.
With that being said, we really appreciate you guys listening, and we hope you continue listening. Like I said, this month we're hitting on the 4 core values. We hope you enjoyed it, learned something. Please, like we shared in the intro podcast, if you have questions, comments, concerns, bitches, gripes, please let us know through social media. We'll have a Q&A session at some point. Let us know if there's something more that you would like to hear on or discuss. We love researching these topics, and we will catch you next week.
If you found value from listening to us, if it made you think, if it resonated with you, we ask that you share it with your friends. Get the word out. If we don't communicate, if we don't spread these things together, there's not going to be a change. And I personally, my goal through all of this is to leave EMS better than I found it. When I got into this job, I was so excited. I was that guy who was the little puppy dog that wanted to make a difference and go save lives and all this. And I feel like that joy, a lot of that got stolen from me. And I want to bring that back to this field, not the gung-ho, oh, hey, okay, look at me. Yeah, but to bring back some genuine pride and respect to this industry. So, tell your friends, spread the word, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.
The Paramedic AF show is property of the EMS 2.0 project. The beliefs, opinions, and practices discussed in the show are our own and do not represent our respective employers. Please follow your local protocols, policies, and procedures at all times. All listeners are encouraged to research and self-educate regarding all content represented in this show. For more information regarding EMS 2.0, please visit our Facebook page for our website and social media links. Thank you for your continued support, and we look forward to you joining us next time.